kicks the goal. Making something out of nothing.
Malchesky, is that the grand final?
Jimmy Bartell can make a hero of himself.
That is a brilliant snap.
He's kicked the goal and Freeman will win it after the siren. What a game of football at the MCG.
Welcome to the Protected Zone, where we discuss all the great features about the great game of AFL, the weird, the interesting, the esoteric, and the not-so-strange and esoteric. In this episode, we round up all the round 23 big matches.
We join the history wars and look at our history and predictions.
We look at what the losers need to do for 2018.
And the season's over for some. We play a sad song for the losers. I'm Linton Nanam, broadcasting from Padang in West Sumatra.
And I'm Eddie J, broadcasting from Studio Sydney. How has your week been, Lin Kang?
The week is great. I've been working hard at a construction site and getting a lot of suntan. And locals think I'm one of them until I open my mouth and say a few words in Bahasa Indonesian but it wasn't, obviously. It isn't. So, they immediately pick up and say, oh, you're not one of us, you're Bule, which means albino or Westerner or Caucasian. Yes, the final is just around the corner, but how did we get there?
Well, that's a very, very good question. And we had round 23, which is the final round of the year. And it was so exciting. I just couldn't believe how exciting it was. Now, it's hard to believe that it was just a couple of months ago when we started talking about round one. We thought, well, when is the season going to end? And we didn't want it to end because it was so exciting. But here we are, round 23. And there were some very, very interesting matches.
Yes, and it was like, season itself. In the digested version, in round 23, we thought, some predictable results and all that. But, yes, there were some predictable results, but we were kept sort of wondering, who's going to end up? They lost. Oh, no. Hang on, who's in top 8 now? And incredibly, the last position of top 8 wasn't decided until the final minutes in the final quarter of the final game of the season.
Oh, and that was such a fantastic result as well. It was like winning the game wasn't so important, but winning by 21 points, which is what West Coast had to do in that game. And the live ladder was more exciting than the football itself. And that's saying something because it's actually quite an exciting game. But the entire season was fantastic. And that final 5 minutes of round 23, I think they just summarised the entire season in 5 minutes. It was unpredictable. It came down to the last few kicks of the season to decide who made the finals, and it was just such a joy to watch.
Yes, and we were sort of glued, weren't we? No script writer could write that sort of way, and it just panned out that way. That final game was weird. It was a game between West Coast and Adelaide, but Adelaide didn't seem to be in the game. Melbourne kept being mentioned. Oh, Melbourne's in. Oh, no, West Coast back. Melbourne, West Coast. Hang on, who are we playing? They must have been confused too. But let's start with the round opener on Friday night. Hawthorn played Western Bulldogs.
Oh, yes, and it was a fantastic game. It was a very emotional game. Hawthorn didn't have any chance at all of making the finals. They were already out. Western Bulldogs, well, they depended on 3 teams above them losing, and they themselves had to win the game. And so it was a bit of a tall order. It was a mathematical chance for them to get in, but it was mathematics plus algebra plus Pythagorean theory. And it was just a tall order for them, but it was an excellent game.
Yes, the 3 excellent players, great players of the league. Luke Hodge was retiring. Matthew Boyd and Bob Murphy for Western Bulldogs, who also announced retirement. They could have played on if the Western Bulldogs had won the game, but they didn't. So that was their last game. As you said, the Dogs had to win the game to stay in that sort of mathematical chance. But it was Hawthorn, that played with more sort of intensity and I don't know what the purpose was, but they seemed to be playing better football.
Oh, they played much better football, and they were playing for pride, of course, and possibly for 2018. But the only problem is that any points that you gain from 2017 doesn't count towards 2018. But I'm very sure that they were playing for pride. It seemed like Hawthorn was the team that was playing for finals and not the Western Bulldogs. But I think the game itself, it summarised Western Bulldogs season where they seemed to be coughing and spluttering throughout most of the season. Hawthorn, of course, started very poorly at the beginning of the season, but then towards the end of the season, they did look like a champion team.
Yes, we'll look at the individual teams, what they could do, the losers, what they could do for next year. But the Dogs didn't seem to have that hunger they had last year. They went on to win the flag. But in the game, also during like the entire season, they had a lot of opportunities, but they couldn't convert them. They missed goals, and in the final quarter, they got very, very close. And I thought, oh well, Dogs will come up and one more bark. But they again missed few opportunities, and I saw Bob Murphy kicking it out on the full, and I thought, yes, that's it. And that's a Dogs season this year.
Yes, I fully agree with you. In 2016, when the Western Bulldogs won the premiership, they were like a dog with a bone. But in 2017, they were like a dog without a bone, just didn't know what to really do. And their season was all over the place. They looked very, very good at the beginning of the year, but as the season wore on, they just seemed to either lose interest or fall apart a little bit. And they became the first premier since 1975 to lose their final 3 games of the following season. So didn't end up well for them, but we can see how it goes for 2018 for them.
Yes, so they eliminated themselves from the finals. That was on Friday night. And then who was left?
Well, Melbourne was in with a chance, and they played Collingwood on Saturday. And my feeling is that Melbourne were counting their finals chickens before they hatched. And while they were busy counting their chickens, Collingwood got on with the game.
Yes, as you mentioned, Hawthorn was more like playing for the finals. Collingwood, they didn't have anything to play for, but they played like they're going into finals.
Oh, they certainly did. And Melbourne, as I mentioned before, they were counting their chickens. It was almost like they had convinced themselves that they were already in the finals and they didn't have to do anything to appear. And I think they actually forgot that they did have to beat Collingwood to be assured of getting into the finals. But by the time they worked that out, I'm pretty sure that they actually started working out their strategies, their final strategies for the first finals match. And they were thinking about that. They were thinking too far ahead. And at half-time, by the time they realised, wait a minute, we do need to win this game to actually make the finals, the game was almost over for them.
Interesting, though, in that game, Nathan Buckley experimented a few strategies. Nathan Buckley's career was online, to say. All through the year, we talked about, Bucks should go or he's already gone and who's a replacement we talked about. But he finally got a couple of year extension. So it was an interesting game from that perspective. He sent a back man to forward man to back, and then he put the new kids in the middle. all sorts of, wow, what's he doing kind of thing, and which is not his trademark thing. He tends to stick to, his game plan or strategy or whatever it's called, and let the players to play. He doesn't make many on the game day alterations, but on that day against Melbourne, he was, changing positions of players and sending players to unfamiliar territories. And I think that played, Simon Goodwin sort of, hang on, what am I supposed to do? I think Simon Goodwin might have turned up, as you said. He was preparing for the first week of September already and, expecting usual pies to turn up. He thought, minced meat will turn up, but it was sort of mashed potato and chicken and, different pies turn up.
Oh, yes. Well, it was the full meal dished up by Collingwood this time around. And I think the issue with Nathan Buckley possibly in the past has been that he's been very reluctant to experiment. And he threw caution to the wind. He was trying all sorts of different things in the game against Melbourne, or the benefit to him was that he ended up winning the game and also getting a 2-year contract. What is better than that?
And on the other hand, after the match, poor Melbourne had to spend an agonising night waiting for the results of other matches.
Yes, there were still a few possibilities for the makeup of the final 8. Essendon had to win their game to be assured of playing in the finals, and they almost fluffed it against Fremantle. They only won by 15 points there, but as soon as they won that match, they were in the finals. They were assured of that, and Melbourne still had to keep biting their fingernails. And I think the Collingwood-Melbourne game actually shows that there is that old cliche that it's not over until the final siren, but in their case it's not over until the final home and away game. The season is over. So unlucky for Melbourne, but they still had to wait until the final game, which was West Coast versus Adelaide, and that was played at 4:40 on the Sunday afternoon, and that was the final match of the home and away season. Before the game started, Melbourne were in the finals, but at the end of it, they were not.
Yes, that was kind of an exciting match. Everyone was talking about, not just West Coast have to win, but they have to win by, more than 20 points. But in between, there were other games that were quite interesting. One of them I found exciting was Buddy Franklin versus Carlton.
Oh, yes, that was a strange game because in the first half I mentioned that it was possibly the most lacklustre brand of football played all year, and it was quite a strange side because Sydney started playing very well and it looked like they were going to win by 81 points, and then Carlton drew them back, and it was almost like Sydney had put the cue in the rack, or they were starting to think about the finals game next week or the week after, and Carlton caught up and they were only 5 points behind at one stage just before half time, and then Sydney kicked into gear, or should I say Buddy Franklin kicked into gear, and he kicked 7 goals in the second half.
Yes, and in the entire match he kicked 10 goals, which is more than the 22 players of Carlton managed to kick. So it was Buddy Franklin destroying Carlton. And he was not just kicking goals, but also he was involved in, plays everywhere. His goal assists here and there. And yes, as you mentioned, in the second half, he was just amazing. And he deserves whatever contract he had.
Oh, yes, he certainly does. But it was almost like an under-10s match because he was all over the ground. It was almost like he was kicking out from the goals, from the Carlton goals, and then he was running along the wing. He was doing tackles, he was doing high marks, he was hand passing, and of course he was kicking goals. So it was almost like he was a one-person team, and it was just incredible to watch in the second half. The first half wasn't very good at all, but the second half was absolutely brilliant, and Sydney ended up winning that game by 81 points.
And the other, predictable result was Port Adelaide.
Oh, yes, Port Adelaide against Gold Coast. Gold Coast only scored 3 goals and 2 points for a total of 20 points altogether. So that was an absolute shellacking, and I'm really starting to worry about the Gold Coast. Have they got a future?
Yes, we're going to talk about the team by team, the losers. Have they got the future? But let's stick to the Port because they're in the top 8, and at one stage they were in top 4. And wow, all through the year we're talking about the Port being the flat truck bullies. Now we've got the only 8 teams left, and the Port ended up at number 5, which means they've got only 3 lesser sides. What's that mean?
Well, I think that Port Adelaide is still the flat track bullies. They've won 12 games against the bottom teams and only 2 games against the top teams. So now they've got no choice. They've got no say in the matter. They have to play teams that are in the finals. So I think they'll be found out during the finals. And
they've got only 3 teams possibly they can beat up.
Yes, only 3. Yes, 3 teams below them. So I don't think it's looking good for them. But they really didn't have much to play against on Saturday night against Gold Coast. And that Port Adelaide obviously are a good enough team to make the finals, and that's what they did. But the game itself was a shocker. If you're a Gold Coast fan, it was a good match. If you're a Port Adelaide fan, and if you're a neutral fan, it was pointless. So, but in my opinion, there were other far more interesting games in the round. There was the battle for the wooden spoon. It was North Melbourne against Brisbane, and this was such an exciting game.
Yes, and we talked about this, but it's the loser that is a winner. The winner is ultimate loser.
Yes, that's the most interesting part of that game. But the live ladder for that game was fascinating as well, because North Melbourne at the end of the first quarter, they were actually on the bottom of the ladder. Then it was Brisbane, then North Melbourne, then Brisbane, and then it was finally Brisbane. But the good thing about being the loser in this game is that you're the winner of the wooden spoon. And I'd like to point out that this is Brisbane's first wooden spoon since 1998, and that was the calm before the storm. They ended up winning 3 premierships in the next 7 years after that. So I'm expecting that Brisbane will win 3 premierships over the next 7 or 8 seasons.
Yes, I would go with that, but now we're going to discuss the details of what Brisbane would do in a little while. And let's go to the game of the round. It was not meant to be, but it turned out to be the sort of highlight, a fitting final game of this fantastic 2017 West Coast versus Adelaide.
Oh yes, and as I mentioned before, prior to the game, Melbourne was still in the 8, and they were probably still working out their final strategies and working out what to do, whether they'd be wearing white shorts or blue shorts, that sort of thing. So they were still in the 8 before the game started. And West Coast had to defeat Adelaide. Now, mind you, Adelaide are the top team. They had to defeat Adelaide. It was a bit of a tall ask, and they also had to defeat them by at least 20 points to make it into the finals. So it was a fantastic game mathematically.
And the West Coast, came out, jumped out of the block, so to say, and they were, more or less leading by that sort of margin, 20 points, 3 goals, thereabouts, and it was a winning margin, that kept. So the game was, West Coast hand, but no one cared if, Adelaide lost. It was a winning margin that everyone kept interested in, especially if you're a Melbourne fan.
Oh, most definitely. And we possibly could have had the side of West Coast winning the match, say by less than 20 points, but being losers. So it's quite an astonishing process, but as I mentioned before, watching the live ladder was as interesting as watching the worm during election night debates. And it was just absolutely fantastic. And so it was a little bit difficult to concentrate on the football because I always had one eye on the live ladder. And the game itself didn't seem to be that significant, even though it was a very skillful game. But the live ladder, that's where all the action was.
And at the last change, West Coast were up by 31 points. And everyone thought, yes, they're going to do it. Then Adelaide kicked a couple of goals. Mitch McGovern and Paul Seidman. At the 15-minute mark, the season was on the razor's edge. At that stage, West Coast was ahead only by 0.1%.
Oh, it does not get any closer than that, does it?
Yeah, no. Then that goal from Charlie Cameron for Adelaide, and everyone thought, oh no, West Coast blew it. And then that Lewis Jetta, and then the Darling's great mark and goal. Oh, just chock full of actions, and I wish. I'm glad I'm not a Melbourne fan. I would have gone, agony and ecstasy in 3 seconds, every minute, every second. You go, yes, no, yes, no.
And I think it would have been a lot more difficult for the Melbourne fans and the Melbourne players because they haven't actually played finals football since 2006. So for them, they'll have to wait another year, and it will be a 12-year finals drought for them at least. But it was an excellent round. It was an excellent way to finish off the 2018 home and away season. So the season is over, but not for everyone. Up next, we look at history revisited. We look at new and old coaches. And what do the losers need to do for 2018?
Don't know where I've been. Going down a hard road. Don't know where I've been.
Growing up, I needed a guide like a blind veteran store.
You're listening to The Protected Zone. You can listen to us on iTunes, and you can also find us on YouTube, SoundCloud, or you can go to our website, theprotectedzone.com. Revisiting history. Now, there's been quite a few things that have happened in Australia where the statues of old white men have been defended by old conservative white men. So we thought that we need to be part of the history wars as well, and what we're going to do is compare who we predicted for the top 8 all the way at the beginning of the season and who actually made it. So we got most of it right.
Now, what did we say at the beginning of the year? We said Adelaide, West Coast, Geelong, GWS, Sydney, St Kilda, Melbourne. And I think, Eddie, you said Fremantle and I said Essendon or something like that, didn't we?
Yes, well, we had to cover our bets. So, yes, we both predicted a smoky for the season. You suggested that it would be Essendon, and I suggested that it would be Fremantle. Now, I was totally wrong when it came to Fremantle. They started off pretty well at the beginning of the season, but then they just fell apart. So Essendon is the smoky for this year. They made the finals, and the two that we got wrong were Richmond and Port Adelaide.
Yes, Richmond, we kept questioning their deal, and against our predictions, they were sort of almost real. And Port Adelaide, I think they had a pretty good, draw. And as we know, they're good at beating the lesser sides, while they're now good against the top sides. So, we were not too off. I mean, Richmond, yes, let's admit, they were to me, it was a surprise package.
Oh, yes, they were the total surprise package. And all throughout the season, we were not convinced. And I think psychologically, we were probably convinced that they weren't the real deal because of our original prediction. We just wanted to be right. And I think as the season progressed, sure, Richmond disappointed us quite a few times where we'd say that they're definitely going to defeat Geelong or they're definitely going to defeat Adelaide. They'd end up losing those games. But I think just watching them over the past few weeks, they've been looking very, very good, Richmond.
Yes, convincing. And they've got the key players in key positions, and they're playing their best footy of their life. In the midfield, Cochin and Martin, and then forward Rewald and Then at the back, we have Alex Rance, and they are holding their positions quite solidly. And there are bit players who are lifted. I often think that it is the actually bottom six of your best 22 players that makes or breaks the sort of team. And their bottom six have improved, and astonishingly. And top players are allowed to play their top footy instead of covering for the bottom six kind of thing. So Richmond, yes, now it's official. They're real deal.
Yes, they are the real deal, and they've made the top four for the first time since 2001. That's a long, long time between drinks, and they haven't actually won a final since 2001. Mind you, they haven't actually made the finals that often. They've only made the finals in 3 of the past 16 seasons, including this one. So I think we can say that they're the real deal. Now, the good thing about finishing in the top 4 is that you get 2 chances. Even if they lose next week, they'll still be back the following week for another go. So good luck to Richmond. I think they've done pretty well this year. I'm still a bit worried about Port Adelaide. As we discussed before, they are the flat track bully.
Yeah, they've got only 3 sides to bully against. And now we cut out the bottom bits, real bottom bits. So they've got only 3 sides they feel very comfortable playing against.
So we know the story about Melbourne and how they missed out by a whisker. The other team that we predicted would make the finals, St Kilda, what happened to them?
Well, St Kilda has got similar problems, I think, as the Doggies. They just can't kick goals. And AFL players should, be taught from the day one that it is a game won by kicking goals. It's no good winning the contested marks or, positions and accumulating this or that. It's the number really, really, really counts is the number of goals. And the coaches need to tell the players, whatever you do, kick the goals between 2 sticks.
Well, that is the most important part of the game. Like, you need to score more points than your opponents. As I agree with you, who cares about contested possessions or inside 50s or outside 50s or percentage in the half, forward half or back half, or how many marks you've taken or whatever. It's the goals that count. And I think some of the coaches have possibly forgotten that. But speaking of coaches, we've just had confirmation that Nathan Buckley will coach Collingwood for the next 2 years, and North Melbourne's Brad Scott is close to a new 2-year deal at his club as well. So is there an issue with the St Kilda coach, Alan Richardson? Is he the right man for the job, or should he go?
Well, there's all through the year we talked about Buckley and Brad Scott and Rodney Eade, who is already gone. But towards the end of the season, Nathan Buckley's team was playing pretty good footy. They were in the mini form, and North Melbourne avoided wooden spoons, so they should be praised or they should be cursed. But on the other hand, yes, Alan Richardson's as well as Fremantle's Ross Lyons, their positions are becoming a bit shaken.
Oh, yes, they have become shaken over the past couple of months. Now, you mentioned that Rodney Eade was sacked from the position of coach of Gold Coast. That position is vacant at the moment. But who would want to coach Gold Coast after their woeful performance, not just last week, but for most of this season, and not just for most of this season, but the past 7 years of their existence? What sort of coach would they be looking for? I suggest that they could be looking for a combination of Mick Malthouse, Jock McHale, Norm Smith and Kevin Sheedy.
Yeah. And, Rodney Eade wasn't too bad for that position because his record at Footscray and Sydney, he was very good at sort of developing size. And I thought he would do the great job at the Gold Coast Suns, but they ran out of patience The Gold Coast is not, old team that's lost the, all the tricks and stuff. It's, team set up by the league, just like GWS. And they were given all sorts of concessions and, favours and stuff to prop up the game itself in Queensland. But somehow that didn't work as good as GWS. The Gold Coast has got the, enough good players. So Rodney Eade would have been, a good fit. But somehow they ran out of patience and Rodney Eade didn't want to. And maybe they need a culture. And as you said, Kevin Sheedy, who's also good at who did excellent job at GWS.
Yeah, so that's what Gold Coast needs to look at for 2018 and beyond.
It started out when I was cleaning dishes and the phone rang in the hall.
We discussed the teams that have made the finals before, but what about the non-finalists? What should they do for the next season and beyond? What should Brisbane do?
Now, Brisbane's the other team that's got pretty good players. Hipwood, I think he can become a superstar. Like not too dissimilar to Buddy Franklin. I'm making a bold prediction. If it is possible to have another Buddy Franklin, but Hipwood, I really like him, and also a couple of other players who are very impressive.
And we've talked about Gold Coast before. Carlton also finished in the bottom four this year. A lot of the media talks about them being a team in development. How many more years will they take to develop?
Yeah, it's a good question. They're also star-studded. They have 5 or 6 rising star nominees. So the talents are there. Inexperienced side needs a couple of old hands to guide them. And at the moment, Carlton Blues don't seem to have sort of leadership players that can lead all those young talents.
So they need a bit of experience in their team for next year. North Melbourne, I think that they'll be looking for a few players. They're probably looking at Dustin Martin as well from Richmond. So they're prepared to pay him big bucks to come over and join them. And they're also prepared to pay the big bucks for Josh Kelly from Greater Western Sydney. Are they the sort of players that North Melbourne need for next year?
I think they traded badly last year. They forced a few of their favourite sons to retire. I think that was a wrong decision. That they are regretting. Daniel Wells doing well in Collingwood, even though he didn't play many number of games. He only played 11 games, but every game he played, he had a great influence. North Melbourne needs that sort of player that can bring in some kind of charm.
Fremantle, we talked about them being the possible smoky for this year, but they went up in smoke. So they ended up in the 14th position, so they didn't do so badly, but they did end up with the worst percentage possible out of all the 18 teams. So they probably need to develop a new strategy or get some confidence into them. So I think that 2018 might be a good year for them, but something needs to change at Fremantle.
Yes, Eddie, at the beginning of the year, you thought they were smoky. What made you think that they might do it?
Yes, the reason why I thought that Fremantle would rise is that they had some new recruits, Harley Bennell, and they had a good core structure of a team. They had Bradley Hill coming into the team, and last year, 2016, they only won 4 games, and I thought, well, every team has a bad year occasionally. And the year before that, they were the minor premiers. So I just thought that last year might have just come down to bad luck or injuries or something not gelling, the planets not aligning correctly. And I thought this year would be different, but it just didn't seem to happen. They actually had a very similar year to last year. Sure, they ended up winning more games, but it was the same sort of thing. When they lost games, they lost them very, very badly.
Yeah, you never said a word, you didn't send me no letter. Don't think I could forgive you. See, our word is slowly dying, I'm not wasting no more time. Don't think I could believe you. Yeah, our hands will get more wrinkled and our hair will be grey. Don't think I could forgive you. And see, the children
I don't think Collingwood had such a poor year. They've got a percentage of around 100 and they won 9 games, which is slightly more than last year. Their position on the ladder was less than last year. They finished 12th last year. But I think that Collingwood have got a lot to look forward to next year.
Yes, some of the games they played brilliantly, and the other times they failed miserably. The consistency is what is lacking from Collingwood. And it was good to see Nathan Buckley experimenting in the final game against Melbourne and actually won the game. If Nathan Buckley can sort of do that sort of thing more often, Collingwood has got the good players, except they need to restructure forward line a bit. But they have plenty of good midfielders. Defense is fairly good. So, yes, as you said, they've got the core structure. All they need is a few key forward, and probably they need new assistant coaches or something. Nathan Buckley needs someone other than just his mates.
Yes, he needs to get some professionals in there, but I think the future is looking good for Collingwood, and I think the future is looking pretty good for Hawthorn as well. They started off with 5 consecutive losses at the beginning of the season, and I think they've been a very, very good team over the past 2 months.
Yes, I think their season was amazing to me. I thought, they would go down, and, share the wooden spoon with Brisbane, or, Sydney looked that way at the beginning of the season. But Hawthorn somehow went through, rebuild very quickly, and came back. And now they're, towards the end of the season, they're winning games. It is only team that beaten Sydney twice in, last 3 months or something. So they've got the, as you said, bright future, and all credit to Alistair Clarkson.
Now, we've criticised St Kilda a little bit and their coach, Alan Richardson, but don't forget that 3 seasons ago, St Kilda were the Wooden Spooners, to add to their many other wooden spoons that they've received. I think they've received 27 altogether. So they were at the bottom of the ladder. Last year they were a mid-ranking team. This year they're a mid-ranking team. Should they have a sense of optimism or pessimism?
I think their season was okay, and
if depending on how well they trade during the off-season, they might do pretty well next year. The big disappointment of the year has been the Western Bulldogs. They were premiers last year. They missed out this year. What happened to them?
I don't know. They didn't seem to have hunger. Just lost the momentum. Premiership hangover.
Well, maybe it's the sort of season that they needed to have so that they can win the premiership next year. And I did some numerology on this, and Western Bulldogs have only won 2 premierships, and they have won both of those premierships in even years, so 1954 and 2016. So this was an odd even year, this one, but premierships and Western Bulldogs in odd years don't go well together. So I think they're going for 2018 to win the next premiership.
Oh, Eddie, it sounds like a too small a sample.
I know it's only a small sample, but it's a theory and I'm sticking to it. Well, we had so many mathematical possibilities and prospects as far as West Coast getting into the finals and Melbourne losing out. So I thought that I'd throw in a bit of numerology there. But Western Bulldogs for the flag next year. And Melbourne, we've already discussed Melbourne, but what a disappointment for them as well. What do they need to do aside from kick an extra 8 points next season? What else do they need to do to be guaranteed of finals action?
Well, they started playing their brand of unsociable footy, and it was working until the oppositions found out. And if they keep on bullying on them, they start bullying on them, and then it's neutralised that sort of strategy.
Well, it seems like from the point that they stopped playing their unsociable football, Melbourne started going down the gurgler.
Yes, indeed. The oppositions found out, neutralise it, and then, what can we play now? Sociable football? Maybe they should start, kissing the opposition players.
Well, either kissing or kicking like Toby Green does. So there's a couple of things that they need to look at, but they were very close this year, so they're almost there, but better luck for Melbourne next year. So you're listening to The Protected Zone. You can listen to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, and you can also look us up on our website, theprotectedzone.com. Next up, we look at the song of the round. Here at The Protected Zone, each week we choose a song that summarises the round, and I'm not sure which song we should choose for this round, because it's been a funny old round. It's been very interesting and exciting. Some teams are continuing into the finals, other teams are not. Which song do you think would be suitable?
Oh, the season's over. The carnival is over.
Well, I did some research into that song recently, and I found out that it's actually an old Russian folk song. Can you believe it? It's a Russian folk song from many, many years ago. From the 1890s it became popular, and then, unknown to me, I just didn't know the history of this song, and it was adapted by Tom Springfield for the...
Yes, Dusty's brother.
Yes, for the Australian folk pop group, the Seekers, who we all know about, and that was in 1965. But we don't want to play the version from 1965. That's a bit old hat and a bit of yesteryear. I'm just looking at some other versions that we could look at, and Boney M actually did a version of it as well. And
yeah, I know the better version. It's Nick Cave and the Bad Seas.
Oh, that would be a good version. Well, let's go out with Nick Cave and the Bad Seas version of The Carnival Is Over. And next week we'll be looking at the finals preview. So it's going to be a big program next week. And until then, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Say goodbye, my one true lover, and we'll steal a lover's song. How it breaks my heart to leave you. Now the carnival has gone. Oh my love, the dawn is breaking, and my tears are falling rain. For the